I'm Dr. Erica Bove, and welcome to the Love and Science podcast. I'm your host, and also the founder of Love and Science, Thriving Through Infertility. I'm so excited you're here today. With over a decade of experience helping thousands of women just like you, I empower professional women to build their families with confidence and compassion. Let's dive in. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to the Love and Science podcast. Today, I wanted to talk about the difference between thriving and surviving. I have been interested in this topic for a very long time, especially as it pertains to being a woman in medicine. I think that we chug along, we do our medical school, our residency, our fellowship. We're just sort of keeping at the task at hand. And, we become new attendings even, and we're like, okay, what I need to do a good job here. And at some point, we might feel like robots. We might feel like our lives are truly just, medicine and that there's not much else. And so I really have been thinking about this distinction for a while, probably most notably when I was a new attending and I thought that being an attending was going to fix a lot of my problems, having more money, seemingly more time. But then I realized that quite the opposite happened. My marriage was falling apart and life was not as I had imagined it would be. And so what does thriving really look like? And perhaps that looks like something a little bit different for each of us. I think that as we each have our own Joy 20 list or Joy 10 list, we can each have our own, particular version of what thriving looks like. But I do think there's some common elements, specifically as it pertains to the fertility journey, that it's worth noting. Because if those elements are out of balance and we're not aware of it, we can't even do anything about that, right? It's like, why am I so irritable? Why am I so short on time? Why am I avoiding certain situations? It's probably because we're in survival mode. Totally understandable. Like our brains evolved literally to survive. And so sometimes when we have a trauma response, a hypervigilance response, it's because this is what our brains know in terms of actually like, our ancestors who were being chased by bears and such. But chronically dealing with infertility can feel like being chased by a bear all the time. And what I wanted to do is sort of go through my top 5 ways in which we can thrive and not merely survive on this fertility journey. So the first is what I call emotional sobriety. Now, what does that really mean? Does that mean that we never have a glass of wine or beer? No. This is about sobriety with our emotions. What that means to me, and I talk about this with my friend Jenny all the time as we navigate life, is that we have this steadiness that allows us to go through a situation, right? Experience that, feel the discomfort in the moment. Maybe it's frustration, maybe it's anger, maybe it's resentment, maybe it's surprise, maybe it's maybe even excitement or happiness or whatever it is, the full range of emotions. But to go through an experience and to honor that experience, but to be the wise leader of that inner world at the same time, right? So like thinking about what is it to merely survive? It's essentially to be rocked by the emotions in the circumstances, like a ping pong ball, not really having a tether, just sort of walking on eggshells, not sure if that next piece of information from the fertility clinic, whether it's a pregnancy test or bad news about a cycle being delayed or canceled, all those different things, that then sends us off into a tailspin. And so, emotional sobriety is basically, it's not that we're not upset about those things because they are deeply upsetting, but it's having that, like I said, steadiness, that groundedness, that understanding that, I am a human and a part of me is feeling anger. I am a human and a part of me is feeling incredibly frustrated by this experience, but it doesn't dictate who we are. It doesn't mean anything about us. We're able to go through the experience as humans and not avoid it, not resist it, to say, okay, this is me walking forward on this journey. And I have this ability to feel all the feelings, right? We have that sort of, I don't want to call it desensitization. It's not really desensitization. It's more like the ability, the tolerance to say, like, I am in this moment and this is what I'm experiencing without fight, flight, freeze, etc. But that ability to, like, I was on a call like this morning, and I was having some pretty intense emotions during that call. It was a medical appointment, actually. And, I just thought to myself, I'm so glad that I practice feeling my feelings on a regular basis, because I can connect with my breath. I can notice what my body is offering to me in those moments. And I'm still able to find my authentic voice, sort of counter things that don't align with my truth and move on forward. I think before I had these skills of feeling my feelings, I might have just like crawled into an emotional hole essentially and just navigated forward without, or maybe my brain would go out, maybe I'd start online shopping. I don't even know. Like that would be my flight response, because that's one of the things I do is not necessarily shopping, but I tend to, flight as soon as something is super stressful. But the ability to stay present in an emotionally charged circumstance and feel centered and grounded, that is a skill. And I call that emotional sobriety. And I think that, that goes along with navigating triggers. We all talked about, all of this around the time of the holidays and how that's a particularly hard time. We just navigated Mother's Day, we're just about to navigate Father's Day. Like, there's so many different like minefields of things that are hard. And some are anticipated and some are not. Maybe there's a baby announcement. Maybe your colleague, says something about a new pregnancy and it just shoots you through the roof. Emotional sobriety is saying, okay, this is happening. This is deeply unpleasant, and I'm going to keep on moving forward. Right. So that's emotional sobriety. And the version of thriving is to really be emotionally sober and stay and hold that tension and not let it take everything. Okay. So the second sort of distinction between thriving and surviving is when we are merely surviving, infertility is the entire picture, right? It's the only thing that our visual fields can see. It's the only thing that occupies our mental space. Like if you say, okay, well, what percentage of your non-work thoughts are occupied by infertility? It would be like most of them, like nearly 100%, right? Another way to think about this is like a house. I think about, my house, it has many rooms, right? So on the fertility journey, it's as if every single room is infertility, like the whole house is infertility. But my goal in terms of thriving is to help my client say, well, this is my infertility room, right? It's a room in the house. It has its space, but there's these other spaces of my life, and there's the whole house, and it is just a part of this house of mine, right? Now, this also extends to identity. So if we think about, who are we? If we are a female physician or even, professional, I have CEOs, I have attorneys who work with me. If we're in our line of work, right, and we are sort of having our professional identity, but the only thing we can think about is like, when is my next appointment? When is my egg retrieval? What if my cycle gets canceled? All those things, like that our identity gets to be so fused with being on the fertility journey. It's exhausting, it's tiring, it's frustrating. It seems like there's not any room for anything else. But, I think that we are all entitled to things that give us joy, even and especially when we're on the fertility journey. So, for instance, I have a client of mine right now who is in Europe learning how to arrange flowers, because as she is awaiting her embryo transfer in a couple of months, she thought, what's the best use of my time? This is something I could not do under different circumstances. And so she took the opportunity to go to Europe and arrange flowers. That's beautiful, because beauty is one of her driving principles, and she's getting to explore that. I have another person who loves Broadway. And so like part of her experience is making time for Broadway shows and even integrating that with her fertility journey and finding some songs that remind her of things. And I think that's super wonderful. And again, you could say, well, the house analogy kind of breaks down. It's actually even better than that in a sense, because it's integrating the experiences in a way that we become whole people. So I think that when we think about our identity, it's like, who am I? I'm a person who loves to go to nice restaurants. I'm a person who appreciates beauty and loves to welcome flowers into my life whenever I can. I'm a person who loves live music and looks proactively at the calendar to see who's coming to my area. Or maybe if you're like a friend of mine, maybe you and your people, your significant other or friends, maybe you travel, elsewhere because you're a music junkie and that brings you joy. But I think it's like, it's giving yourself permission to say, I'm more of a human than just a person on this journey. I can plan things in my life that are outside of this. I can delay a treatment for a cycle because I'm living my life. That to me is a sign of thriving and a sign of health, that we don't feel so beholden to the whole process that we truly cannot do anything. We cannot envision any other aspects of our life as taking priority during this time. Okay. So the third way I think we can sort of distinguish thriving and surviving. So if I'm surviving, my relationships are kind of humdrum, right? Like I might check in with my friends, I might have a relationship with a significant other, maybe my parents, but sometimes like if we sort of have those quiet moments and we look internally, like we know that something is off, right? Like maybe it's in the distance that we have between ourselves and our significant other. Maybe people chronically ask us how we're doing and we just leave that as a hanging question and we don't really close the loop and answer. Like all those things, like we know when something is broken, right? So someone's just like, gosh, these people keep texting me. I'm just trying to get through my day. Like let me just like see another patient. Let me just book my next appointment and leave me alone. But that's not really, we're humans, we're social beings. Even my introverted self can say, like, I appreciate human contact and I plan things proactively. And I really do enjoy being around people, especially people who bring me joy and lift me up and have similar views of contributing to the world and set big goals for themselves. I think about sort of all the people who just improve and enhance my life, right? So when we have a sense that our relationships are well, we know it, right? And that to me is the third way that we know that we're thriving. And so we proactively reach out to our friends. Like I talked with a client yesterday who's like, I talk to, all my important people at least every 2 weeks. And I was like, that's amazing. That's something I aspire to. And like sometimes I even have to write a little note in my calendar, like, have you touched base with people? Because like left to my own devices, I'm like a fish. Like I take a deep breath. I go underwater. I'm underwater for a few weeks. I pop up again. I'm like, hi, by the way, how's everybody? Like, I mean, sure, if there's a birthday or something, I might come out of it, but that is sort of just by nature how I am. And so, that's how I got through my residency. It's how I got through my fellowship. Definitely in the last few years, I've been better about this, but it's something that I consciously keep at the top of my mind is like, how are my important relationships doing? Am I reaching out proactively or am I waiting for people to respond, to reach out to me? Am I planning things in person with those important people in my life? One of my like sort of things I like to do, if you know me well, is I like to have races where so as soon as I finish one, and I do this with I guess two particular friends. I finish one race and then we plan the next one because it's like, I need to see you quarterly. And if I'm going to see you quarterly, we're going to figure out how that's going to happen. And it's going to happen because we both enjoy exercise, we both enjoy even traveling to places for exercise. So it kind of fits a lot of the things that are fun for me and us in a way that allows that relationship and those relationships to be maintained. So sometimes a little structure can be helpful, but I think, if it's been like, I don't know, 6 months since I've talked to my sibling, like that's not good, right? Then I have to look at it. But if I'm like, I'm in right relationship with my people, the conversation's flowing, I support them, they support me. Everything doesn't have to be like a long drawn out conversation. Sometimes it's just like, hey, I'm having a hard time. Can you send me some energy? And then a good friend is like, done. And I'm like, well, we've connected. I've asked for what I needed and it doesn't have to be a big to do. So I think just like doing a social inventory and being like, how are my relationships doing? How do I feel first and foremost with myself when I sit with myself? Because that's the most important relationship we have is a relationship, with ourselves. And I would argue our spiritual source. And so like when I sit in those quiet moments, how am I really doing? And then, thinking about how am I in social situations and how am I in my family? How am I in my friendships? I'm a single person. I don't have a partner, but if I did have a partner, how is that relationship going? Just to kind of do an inventory and to be like, am I thriving or am I surviving? And if it's surviving, the good news is there's things we can do about it, but we have to be intentional about, putting our energy there. We say, where our attention goes, the energy flows. And so if we're not putting our attention on our relationships, and maybe we just feel like our well is so, dry that we don't have that. If that's the case, we need to figure out how to create a little room for that because there's this sort of giving and receiving that happens that in the end gives us energy because it feels good to love on our people and to be loved in return. So that's what I have to say about relationships. The fourth way that I tell if I am thriving or surviving is my ability to set loving, flexible boundaries. And I say loving, flexible boundaries because anybody can set a boundary that's like this very extreme, like I am on my little island and nobody's allowed in, and it's harsh and it's cold and it's not coming from a loving space, right? I think we all know how to do that. But when I say loving and flexible, really a boundary, and I learned this from my mentor, Kavitha, she talks about how a healthy, loving boundary honors and respects both people at the same time. So it's basically like, I am honoring, respecting you. I am being honored and respected at the same time. And we have to find that space where everyone's needs are honored and respected, right? And if we're crossing our own boundary, then that's not good. We got to evaluate that. If we're crossing somebody else's boundary, that's not good. And if somebody feels disrespected, it's worth a conversation. So, maybe you're a person who is undergoing IVF and you need some time off from work to be able to make the morning monitoring, right? And you're struggling to find a way to ask for that because your office is very busy and you're already getting pressured from the administration to see more patients, like whatever that is. Like, I think that there are ways to handle that conversation that is a very sort of firm, cold, just I'm doing it. And sometimes we do have to be that way, right? But I think also there's ways to find our own voice and ask for what we need. And, like I said, there's another episode I just released about how to find time for IVF and fertility treatments. I think, in certain teams, it's a two-way street, right? Like, okay, I will pay you back when I can. This is what I need right now for me and my life. And that to me is a sign of really thriving and not just surviving. So I think that the more we can look at these conversations, we have to figure out what we need first, right? Like boundaries are kind of like 4 steps down the road. First, we have to figure out who we are and what we need, and we can ask for what we need. And if we're not getting what we need, we have to look at that and say, okay, well then, how can I like figure this out? And like if things are encroaching, if the schedule's encroaching, if there are people in our lives who are not being supportive. I just talked to someone, my goodness, the other day who had a friend who said some pretty harsh things to her. Well, guess what? Like that person doesn't get to be on the island right now, right? Because that's just not a source of nourishment and strength. But to be able to say like, hey, like I really care about you and I know you care about me. This is a time in my life when I just need us not to talk about this fertility journey. I will let you know when I have something to share. Like that is a way that we can honor and respect the other person and honor ourselves. Because if somebody doesn't know how to be sensitive about these things, then guess what? We draw the boundary that they're not allowed to talk about it. So yes, and there's more to say about boundaries. I have other podcasts and I even have a whole module in my Thriving Through Infertility course on boundaries. But I think the ability to know what boundaries we need to set, we need to know where to put that line, we need to know where our flexibility is, we need to know how to hold the boundary when needed to really hold that discomfort. To me, that's a sign of thriving and not merely surviving. Surviving is just like, sort of cutting people out entirely or sort of not even sitting with what we need or not thinking outside the box and just having this either we overgive or we overset the boundary and we have these harsh, rigid ways of being. But I think if we can really come up with, this is who I am, this is what I need, and figure out what that means to us, then that can really be a sign of health. And then the last way that I think about when I'm thinking about thriving versus surviving is the ability to surrender. This is a tricky one because, the fertility journey, there's so many hopes wrapped up in it. There's so many dreams. If I always ask all my new clients, like, what is your deepest why? Why are you on this path? Like, what are you most deeply hoping for? And so when we want something so deeply, it makes sense that there's tremendous fear, anxiety, worry that this particular thing might not come to fruition, right? So maybe it's you're trying to become a mom for the first time and you're really feeling threatened that might not happen. Maybe it's you already have a kid and you're dealing with secondary infertility and you're really struggling to grow your family. Maybe you have loss after loss and you're just wondering when is finally going to be the time when you're able to carry a baby and deliver. Like all those things, like those are all very, very real things. I think what can get us into trouble is when we have attachments that don't serve us. And let me be clear about what I mean. It is natural and human to hope for a certain thing. So for instance, like if I am queued up to have an embryo transfer, it is completely normal to say, I hope and I pray that this little embryo takes and that this is the last time I ever have to go through this. That is very normal and natural. I think what gets us into trouble is when we say, well, I have to be pregnant on this last cycle because I have this rotation or I have that, thing planned this summer and this trip. And like, it just has to happen now. Or, if we sort of say it has to happen in this way and this has to be the protocol or this has to be the thing, what I think, and I think about this all the time because we know that female physicians have worse outcomes than our non-physician counterparts. And the question is, why is this true? And it's not just explained by age. I've been really thinking about this a lot in my reflections and my studies. There's not a ton written about it, but now I have a ton of experience that I can draw on. And I think that a lot of it is the hypervigilance that we have and how much we want something. And so what we're taught throughout our training is if you work hard, you're going to get a result. And if you work harder, you're going to get a better result. And so we applied the same philosophy to the fertility journey where we're like, oh, I just have to try harder. I just have to want it more. I just have to restrict my diet and be super clean. I just have to do this with my exercise. I have to live with all these rules. I have to go gluten free. I have to do whatever it is, like drink whatever smoothie, beets, pineapple, like, French fries, like, I have the most quote unquote compliant patients and clients that I've ever seen. That is helpful to a point, but I think at some point it doesn't serve us. And so there's this hypervigilance, there's this stress, there's this worry that we're doing it wrong that I think energetically is not so beneficial to the process. And so what I think is that, I encourage all my patients and my clients to get to what I call the sweet spot of hoping for the best and then releasing the outcome. It is so hard to do. And I actually think this is a version of surrender, right? I think when we are able to trust the process, trust our bodies, authentically surrender to the bigger picture, I think the transfers go better. I think the success rates are higher. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean you didn't, surrender well enough. That's not what I'm saying. We cannot use this against ourselves. But my point is, how can we get ourselves energetically in the right space where our highest good can be realized, right? And so, I think about, what does this look like? This looks like understanding that one embryo transfer is truly a chapter in the book, right? And that we trust the process. We trust our team as long as we've curated it carefully. We trust our coach if you're lucky enough to have a coach. We trust ourselves. We trust the process that ultimately it will happen when it is meant to happen. It doesn't mean we're passive in our process. It doesn't mean that we don't, take the driver's seat in terms of asking empowered questions, all those things. It is important to be confident in our treatment plan, but that comes from a different energy than sort of being hyper attached to the outcome in a way that we start acting in ways where we're micromanaging ourselves, if that makes sense. So what I always tell my clients is okay, what is evidence-based that makes a difference? What is not evidence-based and what can we let go of? How can you trust me to take the burden from you? How can you understand that you are meant to become a parent and you will have your pathway to parenthood? It may not look like the original plan A, but there is a little soul who's waiting to meet you on the other side. And how can we bridge you there? Like, those are my questions. And so I think when we are at lower vibrational frequencies, when we're stuck in guilt, shame, regret, sometimes even grief can keep us down. Like, those things are really, really hard because then we really are stuck in lower vibrational frequencies and, sort of our old patterns of what worked for success start to take over and they start to become counterproductive. What I offer my clients and my patients too, if they're open to it, is the ability to turn it over spiritually, to look for the authentic hope, to be confident in the plan, to trust the process, to trust our bodies, to trust our team, to hope for the best and let go of the outcome. And when we can do that, in my opinion, that is a sign of thriving and not merely surviving. So that was a lot. And I really do believe in everything in this. Sometimes it's not just listening, it's really like letting these concepts wash over you. So if you listen to this podcast again, fantastic. If you want to book a call with me to talk about these things in more detail and figure out how to really integrate these into your own life, That's a wonderful thing too. But these are some things that I've learned is sort of the distinction between people and people when they come to me. I would say more than 99% of my clients when they come to me are in survival mode, and whatever they're doing is not working, and they've had transfers and they've had unsuccessful treatment, they've had losses, and they're just like, listen, I did everything they said and it didn't work. I'm in the 5%. Like, these are my people, right? And so what I love to do is I love to say, okay, let's look at what's happening. Let's see what is serving you. Let's see what's not serving you. This includes our thoughts. This includes our feelings. This is where some of the coaching tools come in, right? To kind of clear all that out, bring awareness and figure out what we can shine light on and maybe choose differently in terms of our thoughts and our feelings. Because what happens is when we even slightly change our thoughts and our feelings to things that align more with our values, that's when our actions flow from that. And that's when we start to see the results that we want to see. And so, although I could never say, like, yes, this is going to guarantee you a positive result, I can tell you this is what's working for so many of my clients and my patients. It's a beautiful thing. And hey, even if we were just thriving and not surviving in other realms of life, it would be a win-win anyway. So, but that's not the point. The point is fertility, but it does up-level all these other aspects of our lives as well. So to review, I want to sort of go through the top 5 ways that we know or can strive to be thriving and not merely surviving. The first is emotional sobriety and navigating our triggers with grace. The second is that we have a broader sense of identity than just infertility, and that infertility is truly just a room in the house, right? It's sort of, we have a regained sense of perspective that it's not everything. The third is that our relationships are well and healthy, and we know when that's the case. The fourth is to be able to set loving and flexible boundaries. And the fifth is to be able to hope for the best and let go of the outcome, which is as close to my version of surrender as anything that I've ever found. And that, I think, if you sort of read between the lines here, this does require a deeper sense of trust. It does require relying on some sort of a higher power, whatever that means to you, whatever name you use. And maybe it's love. Maybe it's the love that you have in your family and your friendships, like all those things, but something that is bigger than ourselves, because spoiler alert, we have to absolve ourselves of all the responsibility because it's not ours in the first place. We take it on and it just does not belong to us. So with that, I will say, it is your birthright to be thriving and not merely surviving. If you're hearing this and you're like, oh yeah, that's me, I am just surviving, there is a way forward. You just need support. We are not taught how to thrive. We are taught how to survive, and we need a whole new set of tools to be able to navigate at these higher vibrational frequencies. So I would love to have a conversation with you. Let me know. Like I said, I figured this out in my own life, and I'd love to share what I've learned. It's not easy. It's a daily discipline. It is better in community, I promise you, but there is a way forward, and it's just the most worthwhile thing you'll ever do. So, I love you, and I will talk to you later. Can't wait to have more conversations about this. Mwah. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Love and Science podcast. I'm so glad you joined us today. If you found this conversation valuable, if you could please rate, review, and share this podcast with your trusted people, it would mean so much to me. If you want more tools to help you navigate the fertility journey, please book a discovery call with me today. The link is in the show notes. Please do not let infertility have the final word. I'm here to take the burden from you so that you can achieve your goal of building your family. In gratitude, this is Dr. Erica Bove. I'm rooting for you always.